Hi, everyone, and welcome to the post-secondary video remote interpreting portion of the VRI Symposium. My name is Bambi Riehl, and we'll spend the next 45 minutes or so together. So again, just double checking that you're in the right workshop. It's post-secondary video remote interpreting. Before I begin, a big thank you to Mary Lightfoot and her whole team on her project for setting up this experience for everyone. I think it's a rich learning environment, so kudos to them for giving this a try. A little bit of housekeeping. I have a team presenter named Lisa Carringer, and she will do what I consider the second portion of this presentation about video remote interpreting. So we will have a separate set of slides for you and a different handout. Just one comment about my slides. The slides you'll be seeing and using on your own are very visual. There's not much writing on them. So I will provide for you, if you don't already have it, a handout with much of the content that I am talking about today. So don't worry that you will not get the information, but I kept my slides very visual. So a brief introduction about myself. As I said, my name is Bambi Riehl. I work for a grant, a U.S. Department of Education grant called HEPNet 2. I think some of you might be familiar with our organization, but for those who are not, we focus on improving post-secondary outcomes for students who are deaf and hard of hearing, including students who have co-occurring disabilities. So we might work with colleges, universities, high schools, teachers, faculty members, voc rehab entities, adult basic ed courses, and of course, students who are deaf and hard of hearing themselves, and their parents, and interpreters and captionists. My job as the Associate Director of Technical Assistance is to run a team that fields all of the requests for assistance from across the country. So as you might imagine, those questions range from, we've never had a deaf student at our campus, what do we do? How do you find interpreters? How much do you pay interpreters? How long can they work in one class? To, we might get questions about captioning. What is captioning? We might get interpreters asking for unique materials that meet their needs in a university environment. So I encourage you, I hope you'll go to our website and check out the variety of services that we offer, and hopefully you'll find something there that is useful for you. A little bit more background. I'm an interpreter, as I know many of you in the audience are. I have spent my career mostly in the post-secondary environment. I fell in love early with that environment, and I've spent half of my career at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and this half of my career at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which is where our grant is housed. Our program here at UWM is large. We have a staff of about 20 interpreters and captionists, and some folks who have dual roles, or what we might call slash positions, as both interpreters and captionists. So many of my experiences are from this environment. Now, in terms of video remote interpreting, I've been experimenting with it for about 10 years, and we'll talk a bit more about that today. So on to the second slide. The second slide, and I will describe them to be sure we're all on the same page, is a silly photo of two folks with rotary phones on their heads. And I had put the image in there for you to think about the application of new technology in an old environment or a standardized environment. So during this presentation, I want you to think about, is a new technology, is video remote interpreting a good thing in the post-secondary environment? Or are we just trying to retrofit something that's new and exciting to an environment where there are live interpreters? I just couldn't pass up the great photo with the people with the phones on their heads. On to slide 3, which has a picture of an electrical plug. One of the overarching things I really like to emphasize about VRI in a university environment is I like to say that it's not what we say plug and play yet. We can't go just anywhere on a university campus and make this happen at the drop of a hat. And I think that some universities who are new to having deaf students at their campus believe that VRI is a panacea, that it's going to solve all their new problems and meet all their needs if they don't have interpreters, that we will simply plug in and play an interpreter. We're not quite there yet, are we? I believe I'm preaching to the choir. I'm guessing many of you in the audience know that. Okay, slide 4. You see a picture of my state of Wisconsin. And I want to explain a little bit how I ended up learning about VRI. About 10 years ago, the Division of Voc Rehab, or DVR, in my state came to my university and said, we'd like to talk to you about getting in a partnership to study VRI. And the reason they wanted to get into it was because they have offices at the northern half of our state where there aren't enough interpreters. And they were paying people to drive long distances to interpret 1-hour VR appointments in their satellite offices in the northern part of the state. They knew we were interested in VRI for different reasons at the university, but they were happy to provide some funding for us to study it and then allow us to interpret some appointments in their VR offices. It was interesting, it was messy, it was not totally successful, but we learned a lot. And we did provide VRI back in the day to remote offices in northern Wisconsin. But this is what, on slide 5, what the post-secondary part of that experiment looked like. So you see my green map of Wisconsin with a red star in the south for Milwaukee and a red circle at the top of the state for the University of Wisconsin up in the northern part at Superior. They did not have enough interpreters, and the students signed on to the experiment with us. The course was an experimental psych course with about 10 or 12 people, and as you can see, they're seated in a horseshoe. You see the student looking at a laptop with me interpreting, and then on the bottom you can see our little studio in Milwaukee where I interpreted. If you look closely at the slide, you see the equipment's already a bit dated and that the camera's kind of big and separate from the laptop. It's not built in and just much more equipment, boxes, cords, but it was a very interesting experience. And our thanks go out to our state VR folks for providing the funding to do this. So that's where I began about 10 years ago. And so really, the nugget of that, the reason for that was, slide 6, interpreter shortages. Those universities in the northern part of the state were always struggling to find appropriate interpreters and enough interpreters to fill their needs. If I were to ask for a show of hands and for you to just stop and think, I bet you all know universities or campuses across the country that often have interpreter shortages. I mentioned to you that my university has about 20 staff, both interpreters and captionists, and we still can't meet all the needs all the time. There may be times when we're booked, very busy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and a deaf faculty member may have a meeting. So we try to fill a really high percentage of our needs with staff for a consistencies purpose, but we of course still use agencies and freelancers to meet all of the needs on our campus. We began that experiment with VR with a second reason in mind, and that's because we believe we have very high quality staff, Almost all, I believe all 100% now nationally RID certified, and we want to retain those staff members. And if you work at a university, you know that the number of deaf students ebbs and flows. And so when those numbers periodically declined a bit, we wanted to be able to retain that staff and not lay them off. So that was one of our first reasons for looking into VRI, so that we could provide it to others when our numbers declined. It's something, a good idea for all to think about. Slide 7, simple map of the United States. Sometimes I lie in bed at night and I think about the map of the United States. And I think about all of the universities out there where there are deaf students and how many hours a week of interpreting might be needed and how many shortages there are. From sea to shining sea, I'm sure there are shortages every day. Then I try to think about another map in my mind. And on slide 8, you see a map with many, many green dots. And to me, those green dots represent the numbers of interpreters in the country. And I think about, are some of them not working today in Boston when there's a need in Phoenix for a political science class? And couldn't we do something about that? And how many hours every week are people perhaps going without? This is a good moment for me to say there are many things that are really unknown about VRI in the post-secondary environment. This area is ripe for additional research. Again, right now, we do not know how many hours every week at universities are there interpreter shortages. Slide 9, I pulled out an airline, a flight map from what used to be Midwest Airlines, just for us to think about, can we connect people more across the country? Can we do this? And again, I'm talking solely about the post-secondary environment. Can we build something with agencies, with institutions assisting each other that looks like a flight map, so that when the interpreter wakes up in Boston and has a job canceled, he or she can meet the needs of that political science class out west? On to slide 10, where you see a graph. So, you know, when Mary Lightfoot set out to do this, she said one of the things we want to do is to talk about what is going on, what is the state of the art in that part of VRI for your unique environment. And again, I'm here to say there's not a lot known, but here's a couple of things. In 2009, PEPNet, sometimes referred to just as PN, PEPNet did a survey of about 130 institutions. And mostly we were asking about salary of interpreters and captionists, policies, procedures, that sort of thing, so that people who were new to hiring interpreters or captionists had some baseline data. But I was already interested in VRI, of course, so I threw in 2 questions related to VRI. And I asked these 130 schools, does your campus purchase video remote interpreting? And then the second question, or does your campus sell video remote interpreting to others? Not everyone answered the question. About 100 people answered the question. And as you can see from the slide, the big blue bar, they mean that most people neither purchase VRI or sell it, is at that time in 2009. I think there were about 4 or 5 schools that said they purchased VRI and 2 or 3 that said they sell it. So the numbers at that time were quite low, but again, it was just a sampling of the country. I believe, of course, if we did it today, because I just know that from conversations with people, more people are purchasing and selling VRI. And then the next question I asked on slide 11 was just how much are you paying for it if you're buying it? And the numbers sort of looked like the Wild West. There was no rhyme or reason. Everybody seemed to be coming up with their own numbers, everything from $45 an hour to $95 an hour, some fees per minute, which are common now. So at that time, there wasn't much baseline information for us to record. So let's talk about, on slide 12, various models of providing VRI in an institution. How do people get from point A to point B? How does this happen in a college classroom? I think when we first think about it, it seems sort of simple, you know, this agency connects to you and that's what it is. But I actually, as I thought about it more, there are many permutations of that model. So bear with me for a bit on this slide to just hear out some of those permutations. It could be an agency providing VRI to a campus, and that agency might have a call-in service where if you have an interpreter who's ill, you can call in at the last minute. You don't know which interpreter you'll get, but you'll get an interpreter. Could also be an agency with a small team that rotates, perhaps 3 interpreters who rotate for one particular class during the semester. And then finally, and I think what everyone who works in post-secondary hopes for is that it could be an agency providing VRI, but they promise you that you will have the same interpreter throughout the course of that semester. Then let's flip to one college providing VRI to another. And the same elements can apply, paralleling agencies. It could be a call-in service where you don't know who you're getting. It could be a commitment of a small team to rotate for the semester, or it could be a promise of the same interpreter for the entire semester. A couple other unusual permutations might be a freelance or private practice interpreter working out of her home, providing VRI to an interpreter. Or I've also come across institutions who provide VRI solely to their satellite campuses in sort of a closed environment. And by the way, that seems quite successful because they can limit the number of variables by knowing we're only going to provide it to these 4 satellite campuses in our county. We know the infrastructure, we know the IT people, and it seems like a win-win. And in most cases, avoids driving out to that satellite campus. One final element in terms of the model, I've started to see and hear people talk about team interpreting, because of course many university classes are over 1 hour, where the university has 1 live interpreter on the campus and 1 VRI interpreter. And it's interesting teaming dynamics and turn taking, but I have seen that model pop up. So I think I've just mentioned 9, 10, maybe 11 different models and ways that an institution might provide VRI. Now let's talk about some variables. So I have about 6 different slides of variables, and I consider that these are, you know, just a few for us to think about. So slide 13. You've all been in these rooms. It's an auditorium style room. It looks like just about every seat is taken. Almost every student has a laptop, and the deaf student could be perhaps anywhere in the room. So depending on the course content and format, this actually could be a pretty good place to provide VRI. At first, it looks like a messy, busy environment, but if it's a lecture-only course with the prof up front, perhaps a law class that maybe doesn't use a lot of interaction, this could be pretty good. You could have the prof mic'd, and if there, again, is no participation from the students, this could work out pretty well. And one additional bonus for some deaf students is they can sit nearly anonymously anywhere in the class because all these people have laptops out and have access to the lecture. So what at first looks a little messy might be a good place to provide VRI depending on the acoustics. Slide 14, another environment, a semicircle or, a slight semicircle of tables, maybe 75 people in the room, maybe only 50, prof up front at a podium, maybe some good acoustics because the room looks pretty new. But those of you who are interpreters or instructors know the element here that could be introduced is class participation. And that gets a little more difficult to make sure that you have the appropriate microphone that can either pick up the whole class or the prof repeats the questions. There's much to consider in a room like this. Slide 15, students all over the floor. Small group work that probably looks like it's happened with Post-it notes of various colors on the wall. People sitting really close to each other on the floor in small groups, and I believe the floor is concrete. So it could be a nightmare environment for VRI. And one of the reasons is perhaps the students have moved from some tables or desks. They've moved to the floor. And if the VRI equipment is hardwired, that means unplugging, moving, perhaps relying on Wi-Fi could really throw things off, reconnecting. And again, those of you who interpret in post-secondary or educational environments where there's small group work, it's really hard to hear. In the VRI class that I showed a picture of earlier with myself, they did do small group work. And the students would come and sort of gather around the laptop. I like to say sort of like, the campfire. They would gather around the laptop and I would voice for the deaf student, and that worked out pretty well. But this looks like a much noisier environment. And I'm guessing there was a lot of movement with people working on sticky notes on the wall. Little tougher spot there. Slide 16, small class, 6 people, brightly lit room that looks very friendly, a whiteboard at front. And I think at first glance, it looks like a pretty good environment for VRI. And it could be, except note how much the instructor is writing on the board. And so I think it's a moment to really talk about the reality of access to the board. And I think that we certainly will come around to this well. We know of two-way cameras now and the ability to maybe see the student and the board at the same time. But again, we're not quite in a plug and play environment for that. It's not happening that quickly. But otherwise, this class looks pretty doable. The students are sitting near each other. There's fewer of them, so there's probably good familiarity of each other. They know, they would know that we're having VRI in there. I think it could be a real successful situation. Slide 17. This looks pretty good, doesn't it? 5 people sitting at a small table, some laptops. They're all looking at a large screen together, a magnified screen. Add another laptop for VRI, a desktop microphone, and I think we'd be pretty good to go in this situation. Finally, in terms of our examples, slide 18. If you've interpreted in post-secondary environments, you know that in spring, a professor will often say, let's go outside. And here the students are spread out, sitting on the quad or wherever, props up front, much traffic going by. And again, if you were hardwired, it'd be pretty difficult to unplug, get out there and recreate a solid environment. Now, of course, many campuses have Wi-Fi and it might be doable, and that's the goal, this ability to move anywhere in a mobile environment, but it's still kind of difficult right now. And again, if the students are participating and they're sitting up next to the tree, it's a little bit tougher out there. So again, that was just a quick review of some of the physical logistics of VRI, which to me are quite different than, for example, a standing business appointment that uses VRI, maybe a weekly staff meeting in which the same 4 people attend. It happens in the same small office every week. They can rely on the acoustics, very predictable environment. So if the message today is that post-secondary is not very predictable. I think I'd be remiss if I did not talk about bandwidth. When I told you the story that my campus provided VRI to another, one of the difficult issues was bandwidth. My university is a big place, 30,000 students, and our IT folks like to say that we have big pipes, as shown on slide 19, big pipes, meaning lots of predictable bandwidth, a very consistent bandwidth environment. The university that we provided VRI to did not have that same consistent high bandwidth rate. And so we struggled with that, but we did have a resolution in that once we found out their bandwidth was not predictable, their IT folks were able to do what they call prioritizing us for bandwidth on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11 for an hour. That port in that classroom had first access to the bandwidth. We would get our bandwidth and others sort of waited in line. But I think one of the difficult things for some universities who are anxious to try VRI to accept is that if you don't have the appropriate consistent bandwidth, it's really, asking for failure to begin this sort of work for providing a student's needs. And along with that, I think we need more backup plans, because if you have technology, you're going to have problems. So I haven't seen a lot of real successful backup plans yet for what to do when we have system failures. Let's talk about some course variables now. Think about the different majors students are in and the types of courses they take, ranging from math, which is very, visual on the board, calculus, accounting using spreadsheets, biology, experimentation in a lab, law courses, architecture courses. You can just envision the variety of environments and content that one would need to cover. But, I've talked to profs who say, but don't worry, it's all on the syllabus, as slide 21 says on the t-shirt. It's all on the syllabus. But actually, it's not always all on the syllabus. The syllabus might tell you that this is an architecture class that is, 4 hours or whatever, and who the prof is. So you know the topic, but you don't know if that instructor has an accent. You may not yet know if there's an online component, such as on Blackboard, where students are required to post comments in a discussion forum. And if you aren't granted access to that forum, you don't know what they're talking about when you begin interpreting. Is there going to be group work? Where will that group work happen? Are there presentations? Are there guest lectures? Are there videos? Will you be showing YouTube videos, such as a montage of all the Super Bowl ads that, are produced for the year? If it's not captioned, how do you handle that in VRI? So again, it's just to emphasize, I think that there are more variables than meet the eye. And the other I think, challenging reality of this is that when you interpret remotely, it's easy for the prof to forget about you. So, we used to talk in this field about the machine model. And in some ways, I have experienced profs treating me that way because they can't see me. So I request information about the next, class, where are the PowerPoint slides, and it's very easy to forget an interpreter who's not there. It's very easy to forget to add him or her to the Blackboard list to give the person access. It's very easy to forget to tell the interpreter that the course is moving to a different room in the library next Thursday. So it really requires, I think, even more communication with the prof and the student and the Disability Services Office. So now, as we wind up here, I'd like to give you 3 questions to ponder. So on slide 22, the first question, I have an old-fashioned typewriter with an iPad stuck in it. For you to think about, just because VRI is available, does it mean we should use it in post-secondary? And by the way, if you're already using it, I'd really like to hear from you. And if you think we need more research and attention paid to this issue, my grant, PepNet, right now has a needs assessment online that's available for the next month or so, that if you could fill that out and let us know you're interested, we'd like to hear that. But I'd like you to think about this, and I hope we get to discuss this question later. My second question is back to that map of airline connections. Should we create a national network of post-secondary VRI with perhaps some hybrid of agencies and universities working together to fill the shortages at universities across the country? Is that a good idea? And then third, very simply, what do you see as the pros and cons of doing this? Do the pros outweigh the cons? So 3 questions for you to consider. A few details before I close up here. My last slide, slide 25. I'll make sure that you have access to the presentation document, of course. I want to remind you that PepNet has a listserv and also a live chat feature now. If you have post-secondary related questions, you can either reach us live or leave us a message. Reminder that Lisa Carringer is doing part 2 of this VRI Symposium related to post-secondary. I've left my contact info for you and our website address. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining me in this discussion about VRI, and I hope we get to chat more about the 3 questions that I posed. Thanks, everyone.